Whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and begin.
How many of you enjoy going to the zoo? If you're like me, most of you are going to raise your hands because zoos are a main tourist attraction for cities, and they're just fun to see all the exotic animals that we don't normally get to see here in the Midwest besides deer. So, but what if I told you that research has surfaced that these zoos aren't actually helping the animals, but rather hurting them because of their enclosure size, and the mentality of the animals is being affected by this. So that's why I want to go through why zoos either need to change how they care for their animals or close and give those animals to somebody who has the resources to do that. And before going into too many facts about zoochosis and the effects zoos play on animals, I want to go into what the Bible says. And the Bible tells Christians, and both Christians and not Christians, how to treat animals, whether it be your pets or the animals that we're entrusted to care for by God. So it's no secret that humans are put above animals in the Bible. That's said in one of the very first verses in the Bible, on Genesis 1 verse 26. In this, it does say that God put humans above animals, but this doesn't mean that we are going to mistreat them, because just a few books later, Ecclesiastes 3 verse 18 through 20 says that just as we die, so they die also. And that's also vice versa, which means we're equal, that death affects us both. So there's no really sense in mistreating the animals, whether we know it or not. And then in Proverbs 12:10, this also backs up my statement. It says, "Those who mistreat their animals are wicked, but those who treat them with kindness and in a human manner, those are the righteous." And then summed up in Luke 12 verse 6, God knows and remembers all of his creation. That means the critters, the crawlies, and the humans. So we have no right to treat the creatures cruel, because God knows them just as he knows us. He knows his creation. So moving on, we have the larger and more mobile animals that we see are affected more by zoochosis. And what zoochosis is it's a term they put for the effect their enclosure has on them. You can see a kind of mental state of the animals that you won't see in the wild. So Marianne Mott from National Geographic studied and talked about the effects it has on elephants. And what she more talked about was that captive elephants are prone to live half the life expectancy as their wild counterparts. So even though the zoo is saying that they have better research and medications and all this, the animals are still living only about half the lifespan. And then also they're having troubles breeding and having animals stay alive in captivity from birth. And that's not much of a problem in the wild. And then since elephants are so massive, their enclosures also have to be massive, but that takes up a lot of money and resources for the zoos. So their size also plays a role on how the zoo is supposed to care for them, but as you see, most zoos are really small in that sense. So according to the San Diego Zoo blog, elephants walk over 50 miles a day if they need to get to food and water and things like that, but the AZA, the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, which sets the standards for the enclosure size, only sets it to about 1,800 square feet per elephant. And that's maybe the size of a two-story house, maybe a little bigger than that. But the two-story house is placed on the ground. So all that space, basically. And then most enclosures are bigger than this, don't get me wrong. They're bigger than this, but they're still not big enough. But if you go and look at sanctuaries, they have hundreds upon hundreds of acres that animals can just roam around and constantly see scenery changes and see new parts of the sanctuary that they wouldn't already be remembering, because as you know, elephants are extremely smart. This is where I want to go into, I want to show you a picture from the St. Louis Zoo, and this is the elephant exhibit they have here, which is 3.21 acres for the elephants to roam around. And that's not just counting the outside, that's counting the indoor as well, and the care facility. So here you have the entire zoo, but over here, this little white part, that's where they get to go outside, and then over here a little bit some. And then all of this which is, as you can see, it's about the same size as their actual walk-around, is divided into both the indoor facility when the weather isn't right or when it's not the right time of year for elephants to come out, and then also the medical center for the elephants. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but it's in each of these living stations is divided into eight areas for the elephants. So if the weather is gross or it's too cold for the elephants, they get stuck in here. And in my opinion, that is not a very good way to treat the elephants when they can just send them to a sanctuary instead. So moving on, we have a slightly smaller animal, which is the polar bear. And the polar bear, one article was from Slate. He was doing figure eights in his pool for 12 hours a day. And this is by Laura Smith, the reporter for Slate. So to start off, the zoo enclosure was too small for the polar bear in general. And in the wild, some polar bears will swim up to 100 kilometers continuously. So they won't stop, and that's as far as they'll go. But these pools aren't that big, and so that's why the polar bear can you can see mental effects on the polar bear, as it was just swimming figure eights for continuously up to 12 hours, which you won't see in the wild at all. And so this isn't just in this bear specifically. You can see this in many, many different animals around zoos that are stressed out. They're either bored or they're just mentally affected by the non-changes in scenery or being forced to be in human interaction when in the wild they'd never do that. And the researchers who spoke to Smith, the author of this article, said they're actually giving the polar bear pharmaceuticals, which are man-made, manufactured pills and prescriptions for this polar bear, instead of what it really needs, freedom and the ability to just find its way around the enclosure and given more space. So moving on is the smarter but more mobile chimp. And the research was by Lucy Burkett and Nicholas Newton Fisher. They studied chimps over 1,800 hours and in different countries and zoos, and what they found was the chimps were doing different motions that you won't see in the wild. They were vomiting, poking their anus, biting themselves and others, pacing, banging themselves on rocky surfaces, rocking, and many more different things. And after observing wild chimps for over thousands of hours, none of these behaviors showed up at all. And so they say that changing the enclosure, allowing them to forage like they do in the wild and create their own groups and families will see a decrease in these behaviors. And now that the behaviors have been pointed out, the zoos have a future that they can go to. So for large spaces, they can do, for larger spaces and fewer animals to focus their resources and money on. The medium zoos will be like cats and bears, large areas for them to roam and hunt and things like that. The larger zoos are more of a safari type, like I was talking about. The sanctuary is more like where it only has a few animals, but they have so much room to roam and do their own thing. And then the small is based on small animals like birds and aquatic, where they still have room to fly and do all those other things, but they're not smart enough to know that their area isn't changing at all. And this is why I feel that zoos should be able to change how they take care of the animals or entrust that care to somebody who can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's give them a round of applause.